at all. So welcome everyone to the interview and beyond. So we're going to be talking today about plans for interviewing and then kind of some things to think about after the interview as well. Thanks everyone for coming. And Dr. Begley and I do love to hear if you have interviews. So I guess I'll start with that. If you have an interview set up, number one, let us know. We do like to kind of keep track of who's interviewing where and get a sense of what's going on with our students so we can help to advise future students. Also, we do have a list of alumni who are really excited to talk to you about their programs. I definitely recommend checking in with them, contacting them. They're a great resource in terms of what are priorities at the schools, what aspects of yourself might you want to mention. And I'll talk about this in a little bit. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. So we're just going to talk about in our agenda, why do schools have interviews? The preparation for the interview day itself, and a couple different kinds of interviews that happen, multi-mini interviews and group interviews, and then follow up for after the interview. So steps that you'll need to take after you finish interviewing. So this just kind of a brief note about why schools hold interviews. It's an expensive model for them. Most professional programs or most graduate programs, I shouldn't say most, but many don't actually hold interviews. They just look at your application. For medical schools, though, it's really important that they do meet you and they get a sense of who you are. So when they invite you for an interview, they've already been through your application. They've looked at your GPA, your MCAT, your DAT. So they've got all of that basic information and they've decided to invite you for an interview anyway. So, or anyway, if there's something on your application that's a glaring point, like you got to see an organic, or there's that, maybe your MCAT wasn't as strong as they hoped. They've already seen that when they invite you for an interview, and they're inviting you for an interview anyway. So if you have that thing in your application that you're a little worried about academically, the nice thing to know when they invite you for an interview is they're comfortable with that at some level. That whatever it is doesn't go away. If your MCAT score is below national average, it doesn't go away. But at the same time, when you receive an interview from a school, that means that they're very seriously considering your application and they think that you could be a good member of their class. So it's really important to kind of keep in that mindset. They're inviting me here because they like me. You don't have to prove yourself academically as much as they want to know about things that they can't read in your application. So they're assessing things like ethics, interpersonal skills, maturity, how well you relate to others, how you fit in the culture of the school. So number one, you want to look at the core competencies. Those are the things that they're in general trying to get a sense, but some of the things that they're really getting a sense about are the interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies. Not that they leave off the other things, but those are things that they get in person. Just they're also trying to check, is this person a good match for our program? So when you're preparing for your interview, you definitely want to kind of be thinking about, why are they inviting me here? They're probably not going to be asking you a ton of questions about your GPA because they already know. What you want to do, and your first step after you get an interview invitation, obviously, is set up an interview. So that, I guess I will say right off the bat, if you receive an interview invitation, make sure as soon as you possibly can to go online and set up an appointment. Show enthusiasm, be excited that you have an interview. Obviously you are excited, but let them see that you're excited as well. So don't wait a week. Don't try and be all, oh, I'm so casual. This is not the moment for playing hard to get. Set up an interview as soon as you can. You may need to talk to your boss and ask about a day off. You may need to get home and look at your calendar. That's fine, but try and set it up within, 24, 48 hours. Sometimes they'll just tell you the specific day, so you'll just say yes. So once you've got that part done, you're going to start preparing for your interviews. A few things that you'll do for preparing for your interviews. Number one, you downloaded a copy of your application with a date time submitted stamp on it, and you uploaded that to your MAP account. Make sure to go over your application. Look at every single thing that you put on your application, everything you put on your secondary application, and make sure that you can talk about anything on your application. If it's a small thing you did in your freshman year, you still want to be able to talk about how did you contribute, how did you learn from it. If it's on your application, it's something that could be asked. A lot of the interviews are open file, so your interviewer may have a copy of your application. Don't assume that they'll have a copy of your application. They may not. They may be able to see some of your application. Sometimes they'll only have certain pieces of your application. Maybe they'll only have your personal statement, and they won't have your grades or your MCAT score. Or maybe they'll have everything but your grades and your MCAT score. So when you're preparing, you want to be able to articulate all of your strengths. I recommend having a few stories, so maybe 3 or 4 or 5 stories that are kind of your go-to stories. So something in clinical that was a really good learning experience for you. So when you're asked a question about your clinical, you don't have to be thinking, oh, what's a good story? What's an answer I can tell them, because you might be nervous. So have a few stories that you can kind of draw from and be able to relate to a wide variety of questions. Also, think back to your committee letter interview and be sure you can answer all the questions that you were asked from your committee letter interviews. Dr. Begley and I and Ms. Wilson felt really good about your interviews this year, which is a nice thing. There was nobody who we were like, oh, you guys did a really good job of presenting yourself as individuals, talking about why you're interested in medicine. Make sure that you, again, do the same thing. Don't be assuming, oh, they want X, Y, and Z. Just be yourself at those interviews. That's really important. Talk about, what are you interested in? Why do you want to be a physician? That's something that's very popular to ask. Why do you want to be a dentist? So make sure that you can answer questions like that. And here, know yourself, be ready to discuss your clinical preparation, trends in the field, motivation. Why do you want to be a doctor? What are some things that you think are upcoming in the pipeline that you feel are going to impact your practice? For example, the Affordable Care Act. Obviously, you don't have to read the entire Affordable Care Act, but be generally familiar with things that, are kind of trends in the field. I just saw something recently that Aetna is pulling out of some of the healthcare exchanges. How is that going to have an impact? We don't know, but read what people are writing about so you can kind of get a sense of, okay, how do you think about these issues and what sorts of things might you be thinking about? You really want to be thinking about cultural awareness, about working with underserved populations, and about ethics. And I'm going to send you an email after this presentation, and it'll talk a little bit. It'll give you a few websites to look at for ethics. And I know Dr. Begley sent you something about the Affordable Care Act. So really spend a little bit of time thinking about them, these types of issues. Typically with something Like an ethics question, there isn't a right answer. They're really more just getting a sense of, how do you think about these issues? So talk through your process is something that's going to be important. Preparation, know the school. So you guys should have all looked at the schools before you applied, and hopefully you kept your notes about them. Um, putting together some 3x5 cards that you can look at right before your interview. You really want to go over the school and look at the strengths, the mission, things that for you are really important in a program. You want to be able to give 4 or 5 reasons why you want to go to this particular school. One of them can be it's beautiful and warm in Southern California, or, it's near my family and I'm really family oriented and I know their support is going to be important while I'm in medical school. But for the most part, they want to know why you want to go to this school because of something about the school, something about the program and how it fits with who you are. I sent everybody the feedback sheet that Northeastern students fill in. So there's a link. So students will talk about previous interviews. So last year, students who went on interviews and the year before that filled in some information about those interviews. What was the interview like? How did you get there? Did you feel like it was difficult? What were some central concerns or, things that they took away from those interviews? So review that feedback before you go to an interview, and there's a link in here that I will send you for you to give feedback for the next group, because it only works if people keep giving feedback. And this seems obvious, but match who you are with the school. So read over the school's mission and their clinical opportunities, and then think about what have you done. So that, you guys have been working really hard at this for 4 or 5, 6 years. You may only be talking to somebody for 30 minutes. You're not going to be able to talk about every single thing that you've done clinically. What's going to be most important to this particular school? So kind of think of how you're framing your answers. Same with research. You've been doing a lot of research. You may have a few years of full-time experience. You're not going to be able to talk about all of that in 30 minutes. What is most central? Do you get the sense from the school? And actually, with matching who you are with the school and getting a sense of who the school is, there are some schools do have student host programs where you can stay overnight the night before your interview with a student host. And that's a great way to get a sense of the answers to, these questions. What's important to the school? What are the school's ongoing projects, partnerships, missions, program, niche, focus? You can get a sense of that from talking to current students. And also from talking to Northeastern alumni who are there. Some people feel like, I don't know if I want to stay overnight with somebody because that's going to be added stress. And that's fine if you feel like it's not going to help you. But I definitely recommend, if you feel like it's something that you'll be comfortable with doing it, not only will it save you some money, but it will also give you some insight from a student perspective. You're going to want to go over the school's website and look over specifics of the school's education so that you can talk about things about the education that are important. Do you care about lecture versus discussion versus case-based learning? Do you care about the size of the class, where you'll be doing your clinicals? So really go over that information and see what's important to you. Before you head out to an interview, definitely you want to do some practice. Career Services on campus does mock interviews. You can also videotape yourself doing interviews. There's a really good resource, Interview Stream, and I have the link here. Basically, you set up an Interview Stream account, and then you can have somebody else actually program in some medical school questions so that you don't know what the questions you're going to get are, or you can just do it yourself. The program will ask you the questions and then we'll record you answering those questions. It's a really great way to see, what things am I doing well? What things did I do and say that I felt really good about? What things could I maybe work on improving? It's a great way to notice if you have any verbal tics or if you're playing with your hair, anything along those lines that might be distracting to an interviewer. I would also say you can do some mock interview questions with people like a roommate, a friend, a mentor. I recommend somebody who you're a little scared of and want to impress because it really duplicates the situation that you'll be in the actual interviewer. So, if you have a physician who you really admire, um, if they are willing to ask you an interview question or two, they're a great resource. What you don't want to do is do a practice interview with somebody who's not going to give you feedback that you need. So if there's somebody who's just going to say, you did great, um, that's nice, but you really want to make sure that they're giving you realistic feedback. Everybody always has something that they can improve. So you want to hear, you did great. Here are a couple suggestions that I have. When you're recording an interview, an interview stream is great, but you don't have to use interview stream. You can use a program on your phone, whatever. You really want to make sure to look at, what's your body language like? What's your tone like? In terms of, sometimes they'll they'll ask you a question like, what's your greatest weakness? Obviously, you have to come up with something. You don't want to be the person who's like, oh, I'm just too organized. Um, so you want to actually give them something that's a genuine weakness, but talk about how you've overcome it, how you've turned it around. One of the things that um, the data shows is really important for medical students is resilience. And there's actually um, data that shows that um, resilience correlates pretty strongly with success in medical school. So they do look for, have you overcome challenges? And it doesn't have to be, yes, I walked up Mount Everest with my sister on my back. They're really looking to see, have there been times when you've really pushed your limits and, things have been hard and you persisted. Maybe you didn't get the result that you were hoping for initially, but you found a way to make it a positive experience. And then finally, sometimes we get so focused on, oh, I need to improve this or that. Um, when you're looking at a mock interview, also notice the things you're like, oh, I answered that really well, or oh, I'm really happy with how I did that. And try and repeat those things. Sometimes you even have to consciously repeat them. Think about consciously your body language, that you're leaning forward, that you don't have your arms crossed, that you look enthusiastic and happy to be there. So, interview day, yay, you've got your interview. What are you going to do? Now, a lot of you guys know very much of this stuff because you do co-op interviews. And so you've had a lot of success with those, which is great. That puts you a step ahead of a lot of other people who will be at these interviews who may not have ever had a high stakes interview before. So as I mentioned, respond quickly and politely to the invitation. On the interview day itself, you want to address professionally, conservatively. You're not interviewing at fashion school, so you don't want to look like a fashion, stand out based on your fashion, basically. Basically, in terms of what you're wearing, you want to choose an outfit, a suit preferably, that makes you look good. You want to blend in and look pretty much just like everyone else in terms of what you're wearing. You want to look nice, so choose something nice, but you want to stand out based on what you're saying. You want to stand out based on your mind and your thoughts and your actions, not based on what you're wearing. I recommend arriving about 30 minutes early or shooting for arriving 30 minutes early, just in case there's traffic or you have trouble parking. If you're someplace where you can do a test run the day before, just to make sure you know where the building is, I recommend that. so that you know where you're going and you're taking any uncertainty and stress out of the picture. So arrive 30 minutes early. Don't go in until about 10 minutes early. It's kind of stressful for the people setting up the interview to have people coming and they're not quite ready yet. So while you're waiting to go in, you want to do some things, some positive self-talk, some things that are going to help you feel confident. Drink some herbal tea maybe. I would say stay away from coffee. It might make you jittery and you're going to be jittery enough. Breathe deeply. Um, I know this is cheesy, but write 10 positive things about yourself. So think about things that you really like about yourself, write them down, so that you're thinking those happy thoughts. And I'm going to send you the Stand Like a Superhero TED Talk, which I don't know, does it work? As I was saying in the live session, does it work? I don't know. It's 2 minutes of your life to stand like a superhero. If it helps, it's worth trying. Um, Very important, no gum. You guys were really good with that this year. You don't want to be chewing gum during the interview. And turn off your cell phone. I recommend leaving your cell phone at home or someplace where you can't access it. Although somebody did make a very good point in the in-person session that, you know, if you find out who your interviewer is, you may want to just hop into the bathroom and Google them. If you're given your interviewer's name, Google them, find out who they are, what their research interests are. So learn a little bit about them. So for something like that, you can keep your cell phone, but otherwise turn it off, put it away. You don't want to be taking it out, when you're sitting at lunch, for example, you're not texting, you're interacting with the people there. You don't want there to be a time when a presenter comes in and you're on your cell phone texting. You want to be present in the room. You want them to see this is the most important thing to me. You're the most important thing, not whatever I'm doing on my cell phone here. On the big day of the interview, and I know this is obvious to you guys, but I'll just say it again, be courteous to everyone. A lot of the time, the admissions people have the admin, for example, be a part of the admissions committee. If you can't be nice to an administrative assistant, they don't want you. So you really want to make sure to be nice to everyone you meet on that day within a 10-mile radius, I would say, of the school. My sister does interviewing, and she said one time she was at CVS just buying something before an interview and somebody cut in front of her in line. And then it turned out that that was her next interview. You don't want to be the person that accidentally cuts off your interviewer in line or, cuts them off driving, whatever. So you really want to make, within that radius, you're at the interview, you're on the entire time. Make sure you're being polite. And actually, just one other thing that Dr. Begley and I were talking about, if your parents are coming with you to the general area, that's fine. The only reason that they should be anywhere near the interview site, though, is because they're dropping you off there. So you don't want to seem to be the person whose parents are here with them, helping them on their interview. Um, Leave them at the hotel if they're coming and staying with you in the hotel. Leave them at home if they're, if you're around home, unless you need to arrive there. That's the only reason that they should be there. Don't worry about a little bit of nervousness. Of course, you're going to be nervous. Some people sweat when they're nervous, or they get red splotches on their face when they're nervous. Don't worry about it. I've heard interviewers say, I would rather somebody just be sitting there sweating or looking super anxious than looking like they don't care. So this is the most important thing in the world to you. It's fine to look like you're nervous, but make sure to do your best to work with that nervousness. You don't want to sort of crush that nervousness so much that you appear flat. Um, but do your best to kind of, not let the nervousness rule the day. Smile, act confident, show enthusiasm, be yourself. I have heard admissions people say, people come in here and they don't look excited. And I'm like, look happy. We want you. You're invited to interview. So look like you're happy to be there. Obviously, you're happy to be there, but sometimes because this is for them, their everyday business, they may kind of forget that fact. Um, if you feel like you're having a hard time, showing through your actions that you're happy to be there, you could just say, "Wow, I'm really happy to be here." I think that's a legitimate thing to say. So on the big day of the interview, they are typically a full day, including frequently lunch, maybe breakfast. They often have snacks for you during the day. The interview itself is not the entire day, so the interview itself can be between 30 minutes and 2 hours. You'll probably have a tour of the school if you're wearing high heels. Obviously, don't wear 3-inch heels. I would stick to more conservative heels, but if you're somebody who has a hard time walking in heels, ladies, you can bring a purse and bring a change of shoes in them. Realize that you will probably be walking. If it's raining out, an umbrella is not a bad idea. Um, Also be aware that your interview may be in the admissions building or it may not be. I know for folks who interview, for example, at Harvard, they have you interview with faculty, and some of the faculty are on the Longwood campus. Some of them may be on the main campus in Cambridge. So people will get a taxi voucher in their interview folder. So realize that they may be sending you someplace else to travel to get to your interview. So just be aware that that could happen. Don't let that take you by surprise. The interview itself, answer questions honestly and openly. Focus on contributions, what you learn, not tasks. Those things that we encourage you to write in your MAP profile. Show your passion and enthusiasm. Um, when you're when you're asking questions, try not to ask questions about things on the website. Um, I think it's fine to come with pre-written questions. I'll send you also a video that was written or that was done by some different admissions people. I think different people feel differently, and you'll hear that in the video. That some people would rather you develop questions as you're going through the process. You can bring like a notepad, some paper to write down notes. That's fine. Really, you want to make sure to avoid questions that make your interviewer feel defensive or uncomfortable, or, that they're like, oh, I don't know the answer to that question. So you don't want to put them on the defensive. If you're talking to a student interviewer, they may not know the 10-year mission of the school. That's probably a better question to ask somebody in admissions or a faculty person. So MMI interviews, people are starting to really have heard about MMI interviews. So hopefully most of you have heard of the MMI interview. You rotate between stations. Again, they're looking for intangible qualities, ethics, flexibility, communication, problem-solving skills. The way that multi-mini interviews work, each school is going to have kind of think about what do we want to learn about candidates, and they're going to go to a question bank to pull out those questions. You may get the same question at more than one school. I've heard of that happening, and it's actually possible that if you get the same question at more than one school, they're both assessing for different things. So what one school asks and another school asks could be different. You will get cues from the person in the room potentially, so make sure if they ask you something that you pay attention to what they're asking. Sometimes there are scenarios where they give you some information and you talk about your opinion, and then they'll give you more information, and they're kind of checking to see how long does it take before additional information makes you change your opinion or reconsider your opinion. Um, so really make sure to be listening to them. A lot of the time there will be some teamwork projects in the MMI. So one station may be 2 people, or it may be the entire group actually. I know sometimes they'll have questions where, for example, You and another person are in the room, you're back to back, and let's say they give one person a piece of origami paper and the other person has the directions on how to fold the paper crane or whatever it is. And so they're assessing your team building skills. They're assessing how well you describe things, how well you follow directions. They are not assessing how well you make a paper crane. That end goal is not really what they care about so much. I think with a paper crane one, you have like 5 minutes to make your crane and then 2 minutes to turn around and look at it and discuss, oh, this is what the end product was. And it's in part that discussion and conversation that matters too. If you happen to get somebody who doesn't really give you very good directions, they're not going to hold that against you. Um, but you don't want to turn around and say, what? Your directions stunk. They're looking at that interpersonal and how do you work with somebody. Um, so some of the rooms for the MMIs do have actors in them. I've been to a few conferences where they've introduced us to the actors and actresses, and they can be really good. So, if you go into a room and, maybe on the door it says you're telling somebody that, they have some illness, and then you go in and there's an actor in there and you're actually telling them that they have some sort of an illness, the actor could burst out into tears. So expect the actor to act like a real person would. I think that those kinds of scenarios are things that work really well for Northeastern students because you have so much experience. You have a lot more hands-on experience. So draw from your experiences, draw from what you've learned, shadowing a physician or working with a physician in scenarios where they have, you have to deliver some medical news. They're not looking at your knowledge of medicine. So they actually disregard anything that you say about, oh, this illness, blah, blah, blah. So that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for the interpersonal piece. When you're reading over the question, you want to kind of ask yourself what is it that they're trying to assess. Sometimes you won't know, but sometimes you can kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what they're trying to assess. You don't want to get so bogged down in the details that you forget what they're looking for. Um, so, for example, there are questions where, you're on a ship and the boat's going down and there are 10 people and you can only save 8 of them. Who are you going to save? Right? They're not really looking for how you're handling the sinking ship. They're looking at your reasoning for who you're going to save, how you're thinking it through. How do you value a life? How do you decide who has greater priority? So they're looking at, in something like that, it could have to do with healthcare disparities. It could have to do with big picture. What kinds of things are you thinking about? Um, there's typically not a right answer. So they're not assessing, oh, I got this right. I decided to save X number of people, and yay, I did the right thing. They're more looking at the thought process that you go through. So do that reasoning that you're doing out loud. The same when you get an ethics question, it's really important. They're not necessarily thinking, okay, well, we only want to accept people who have X opinion on ethics. In fact, they want a variety of opinions, but they want to know that you can see more than one side of a question, that you can work with a patient who maybe has a completely different perspective on a question or on an issue than you have. They want to know that you can understand other people's points of view. So talk through the question. Well, on the one hand, I see this issue in this way. On the other hand, I see it in this way. So there could be a wide variety of things. In the end, this is my perspective on it. So they do kind of want you to take a stand to a certain degree. And I would say you can Google, practice questions, medical school interview practice questions. dental school interview practice questions. There's lists out there. There are practice MMI questions out there. So you can do some practice questions and really do some practice questions where you do the timing where you spend 2 minutes thinking of an answer and then talk for 6 to 8 minutes and realize how long 6 to 8 minutes can be when you're talking, because you don't want to run out of stuff also. So do try and get some practice in with those. There are some schools that do group interviews, and with the group interviews, they can have a variety of different formats. Sometimes they'll have a panel of interviewers and a panel of interviewees. And so a lot of the time, they'll ask each individual interviewee a question. And when it's not your turn to be answering a question, you want to obviously be listening respectfully to the other people. Some of the stuff that they say may kind of make you think, oh, yeah, I should make sure to think about that when they ask me the question. They'll probably ask you different questions. And then at the end, they have a group activity. So they're really looking at how well do you play in the sandbox? Do you get along with other people? Are you able to work well with others? Are you able to be friendly with people who in some ways you're in competition with? In an interview, it's important to realize that they don't typically have a set number of people from that interview day. So if there's, 8 people there on your interview day, they could accept all 8, they could accept none of them. So you're not in direct competition with the other interviewees, although I guess to a certain degree you are, because there are only so many seats in each program. After the interview, send a personalized thank you note to each individual. If you're doing an MMI interview, you may not have the names of everybody in the rooms, and in that case, it's okay to send one to the admissions office, the person who set up the interview. In terms of electronic or handwritten, I think anything that's, you're really expected to be sending a thank you, it's better to send it in a way that's faster. So electronic is better. If it's something that you feel like, okay, I don't have to send this person a thank you, but they really helped me out, I want to send them a thank you, then you may go with a handwritten note on a card. We were actually talking about this, and once you get out there in the real world, it seems like all the mail that you get through your mail slot is bills and things that you have to do, and journals and stuff like that. So you get something in the mail and it's like this friendly thank you with a message that really says something from the heart. It's nice. People like it. So it does have a little extra oomph over something that just seems like something that you did because you had to do it. After the interview, you do have the opportunity to check in with schools, and if they're your first choice, it's fine to say so. I just wanted to thank you and say what a wonderful place this was, and I'm so interested. You're my first choice. I would definitely go here if I was accepted. You obviously cannot say that to every school, and don't say that to every school. You may think, well, if I'm not going there, why does it matter? But it is a small world out there. You don't want to burn a bridge. Maybe one day you want to do a residency there. You just want to make sure that you're leaving a good impression with them. Write notes to yourself about the interview right after the interview. Sometimes you get so kind of in your mindset of, I'll go anywhere that invites me to go, that you forget that a lot of you are going to wind up with more than one acceptance. And when you're thinking about, okay, where do I want to choose? You may interview in September and not be making that choice until, April. And so you want to be able to think back to the day and remember specifics about what you liked about each school. So really write down notes to yourself after the interview. This is what I liked. These were concerns that I had. A lot of the schools are going to have second look days if you're accepted. So it's a chance for you to go back on campus after you've been accepted with a little bit less stress and anxiety involved, and just have another tour of the campus, have an opportunity to talk to students, think about things that you maybe didn't think about before when you were there on the interview, just to kind of think about the culture and the fit. And finally, after the interview, I've included the link to share feedback with your peers. We wouldn't have good information if people didn't leave it. And I think that the interview feedback sheet is a really good resource. I want to talk a little bit about what to do if you're waitlisted, just because we don't really have other time to talk about that. Many applicants are waitlisted and then do wind up getting accepted off the wait list. It does happen. Ideally, what we would love if you're a MD applicant is if you got accepted on October 15th, you know where you're going, life is good. Dental students, we love it if you got accepted December 1st. That's the first day they accept anyone. DOS programs, they're a little bit more flexible. They don't have sort of the traffic rules that the MD and dental programs have. So that would be perfect. You know, on the first day, you're good to go. Unfortunately, everybody doesn't always have the perfect application cycle, and that is okay. Getting in off the wait list, you know, is just the same in August when you matriculate as getting in on October 15th. It doesn't feel that way during the year. So you really have to be prepared for this to be kind of a longer process. Hopefully it won't be, but mentally, you may not know until, June. The biggest movement on the wait list for MD programs occurs in May and June. Some of it occurs in July. I've heard of people getting accepted off the wait list in August. Maybe somebody who's been accepted there and was going to matriculate, their funding doesn't work out, the money doesn't work out, they freak out and they're like, oh, I don't want to be a doctor. The schools sometimes contact people and are like, well, you're still on our wait list and we've got a spot, so next week, what do you think? So, it really can happen at any time. It's much more likely that you'll get in off the wait list in May or June. If you are on a wait list, you really want to follow up with continued interest. If you've interviewed at a school, you want to look at what they say in terms of updates. Do they have a maximum number of updates? Do they have a, no update please policy? And follow that. If a school says don't send us updates, obviously don't send them updates. But a lot of programs will allow updates. They may have a set number. For example, Georgetown allows only 3. So you want to kind of spread those out. But if they waitlist you, or if you haven't heard from them for a couple months, you want to continue to indicate your ongoing interest. You don't want to be a pest, but you want to make sure that they know that you're still interested. I've had times when I've talked to people in admissions offices and I've said, oh, this person is a really great applicant. And the admissions person said, oh, we haven't heard from them since the interview. We didn't know they were still interested. So sending that ongoing interest, it's not a bad idea unless they say don't do it. So things you can update them with. If you get new grades, you definitely want to let them know about that. If you have a publication that's accepted, you definitely want to let them know. You get a new job, you get a promotion, but even smaller things, you can kind of contact them. And if you don't have any updates, but it's just been a little while, maybe you're applying to MD programs and you've looked and you've seen that, okay, they start accepting people October 15th. It's now December. I haven't heard. I'm just going to remind them that I'm still interested. Again, you can send a letter of intent to one school. If you're waitlisted at your top choice school, you can send them a letter of intent and say, I just want to let you know if I'm accepted, I will definitely come here. Does it help? Who can say? It definitely doesn't hurt. Each school is going to have their own process. So with that process, they may make decisions differently than another school. But if you're waitlisted at a school, and the school goes through their wait list, for them it's a certain advantage to accept the student that they know is going to come given that offer, as opposed to somebody who may be accepted someplace else. So, for that reason, making sure that they're kind of aware of your interests is important. We asked folks who have been accepted, what are some important things that you would say to emphasize? The first one is really important. Be yourself. You can get into your head so much like, oh, this is who the medical schools want. This is what they want. Who they want is you. They want everyday you. For those of you who are watching the Olympics recently, if you were watching the Olympic gymnasts and they were saying, oh, Simone Biles, she doesn't have to do anything except her regular everyday practice routine because that is amazing and that is what she needs to win. Same thing with you guys. Just do your everyday amazing because that is good enough. That said, do practice. Make sure you've practiced so you can express that. Make sure to focus on a few accomplishments that you're proud of. This is not the day to be modest. Obviously you don't want to seem boastful or arrogant. You don't want to use the word I too much, for example, but this is the day to highlight the things that you're particularly proud of. You don't have somebody else to say, oh, it was great that you got that paper published. You worked really hard on it. It's going to be your day to say that. So really make sure to highlight things that you're proud of. Talk about co-ops. Many schools have heard of the co-op program. Some people may not. So you want to be able to say in just 2 or 3 sentences, okay, this is what co-op is. So that if, somebody asks, you're not spending too much time talking about it, but you're able to articulate it. Remember, it gets like at Northeastern, you're so used to, oh, this person worked at Harvard Med, this person worked at Genzyme. That is not the norm in the country. Not everybody has access to the same resources that you have. So you want to really highlight those things that you've done because they're not what everybody else has had the opportunity to do. In terms of your shortcomings, you don't obviously want to come across like a person who thinks that they're perfect. If they ask you about something that's a shortcoming, acknowledge the shortcoming. What they're really looking for, though, again, is that resilience. They want to know they know medical school is hard, dental school is hard. You may have a moment where you stumble. They want to know that you're going to be somebody who persists, who says, okay, this didn't work out, but I'm not quitting. This is my goal and I'm going to work towards it. I'm going to seek out assistance. I'm going to use my resources. I'm going to get help. I'm going to change the way that I'm doing things. That's what they're looking for. Some people do have a story of something that they really had to overcome. If you're somebody who doesn't have that story, though, they don't need that story. It's fine to talk about a time when you were really struggling in a class and you changed the way that you studied. You went in and talked to a professor, you got tutoring, you joined a study group. So they're just looking for the everyday things. If you're flying to your interview, I think it's a good idea to carry your suit on the plane with you, and you'll see this in the presentation from admissions folks. If your luggage gets lost, you don't want to be the person showing up in jeans and a sweatshirt. If something like that happens, let them know, this is why I'm wearing this, but it's better to not have it happen. Oh, and then don't read too much into anything with the interview. Sometimes I've talked to people who have had an interview with, somebody who's maybe just really busy. Their interview lasted a really short amount of time and they were like, oh, I guess it didn't go well. But in fact, it went really well. The interviewer was probably like, yep, this person's great. Maybe they've interviewed 100 people before and they picked up on it. They're like, great, good. Yep, I'm going to put in a recommendation. All right, we're done here. I can get back to my cells. They're growing. So don't read too much into it. Conversely, sometimes, unfortunately, interviewers will say things like, oh, you're perfect for this school. I definitely think you're going to get in. Don't read too much into that too. Hopefully, that is an indication of something, but sometimes it's definitely an indication that that person's going to be in your court and advocate for you. So that's great. That's something that, it's a good sign. Sometimes people will say, oh, yeah, definitely, I'm going to advocate for you. And then you don't wind up getting in. And that can be just a huge disappointment. And it seems to happen to one or two students every year. So until you've got the email or the phone call that says you're in, know that you're not in. So you can have a really good feeling about it and be really hopeful about it, but just don't think, yep, that's it, I'm good. Because, you know, things happen anyway. So that's not a really cheery note to end with. Let me just end with saying you guys have worked really hard. You've done good jobs on your committee letter interviews. You've spent a lot of time putting all of this application stuff together. You'll read over your self-assessment, read over your MAP profile, read over your application, remind yourself of all the good things that you've done. Really, on the day of the interview, do everything you possibly can to make it less stressful. Have your outfit picked out, planned, ironed ahead of time. Know where you're going, do things to remove that stress, and then just do your everyday, what you always do, because that's going to be what gets you in. So, questions from anyone after all of that? You're not going to be able to state a question, but if you have a question, definitely feel free to type a question into the message box. I guess for folks who are watching the recording, I'm going to end the recording right now. So thank you to the folks who are listening, and feel free to contact me with questions.